Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Andrew Daly of MGI Research, and I'm joined by my colleague Igor Stenmark and our associate Chloe Ladd. And it's our pleasure to welcome you to this session. Here comes usage, adopting and optimizing consumption business models. There's been an enormous amount of talk around usage and consumption billing and business models, and we thought we'd take some time to walk through what exactly is a usage billing and what are the benefits, what are some of the use cases, how can organizations take advantage of it. Um, so with that, a quick note on MGI Research. MGI is an independent research and advisory firm. We work with technology buyers, so mid to very large size organizations. Think of the, say, FT 2000 kind of companies. We also provide subscription research and services to technology suppliers, typically C-level executives, boards of directors, focused on driving valuation in those organizations. And then we also sell research and services to institutional investors. We have a unique focus across the entire span of what we call agile monetization. The kind of legacy term for that is quote to cash, lead to revenue. There's lots of ways to characterize it. We think of it as the prospect to discovery to disclosure cycle. And we cover all of the applications and processes contained thereunder. We have a deep and experienced team. Uh, Everyone typically brings 25, 30 plus years of experience out of industry, out of research, both on the industry side as well as out of the investment side. And as I mentioned, we provide subscription services, benchmarking, and lead a couple best practices groups. So with that, let's take a quick look at the key issues that we're going to be talking about. This area of usage billing over the last 24 plus months has received about 130 million, just under 130 million in venture investment. So there's a lot of interest in this space and belief in the growth of consumption and usage-based billing models and the tools to support that. So without further ado, let me hand off to my colleague Igor, and we'll get rolling.
Thanks, Andrew. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome, everyone. Pleasure to have you here with us. So we should probably start, I think, Andrew, maybe with just a brief introduction of what usage billing is all about. I think the whole title of our webcast today is a bit ironic. It says, "Here comes usage." Well, usage has been with us for many, many years, forever, perhaps, if you go back to historical records. It's just that for many years, this was the domain of some very large companies with very deep pockets who could afford to spend lavishly on advanced technology tools and sophisticated billing systems. And now we're seeing a bit of a change. So it's not just old wine and new bottles, but you have real kind of change and adoption where it's moving from the very top of a pyramid in terms of capability and budget size, more towards the middle and towards the low end of a market where it's bringing this capability to much broader masses, so to speak. That's why it's important to understand what exactly are we talking about? What is usage billing? So in a basic usage billing model, sort of usage billing 101, customers are charged based on the amount of product or service that they consume in a given period, the billing cycle. So probably everyone is very familiar with that in terms of paying the utility bill, you're consuming water, consuming electricity, gas, or anything else that you may be, what your provider may be measuring. So in order for usage billing to work effectively, there has to be a cleanly and clearly identifiable metric. Could be number of users, amount of minutes used, amount of data used up, transaction volume, and so on. A common misnomer that we hear in the industry, people think, I am moving from subscription to billing. Usage is not the opposite of subscriptions. Subscription is a relationship that you have with your customers. Usage billing is one of the pricing models that you can deploy within that subscription relationship. So that's a very important distinction. What does one needs to deploy usage billing within your subscription models? Well, you need a solution that really can support this model effectively, and it's not just a simple model, but perhaps a spectrum of different solutions for usage billing. It can convert the raw data that's collected into accurate invoices, account updates, and go beyond that. So, as I mentioned just a couple of moments ago, usage billing used to be the domain of a very large organization. So typically in the telecom world, every telecom company would have a capability to provide usage-based billing. Then, maybe 10, 15 years ago, we began to see a kind of a rapid adoption of this model in cloud computing, in enterprise software. So some of the largest tech companies began to deploy usage billing. And now we're seeing that a lot of really new companies, especially companies focused on the AI markets, they are beginning to deploy usage billing. So there's this increasing and fast accelerating trend towards what we call commoditization of usage billing, where companies are looking for ways to creatively monetize their assets, monetize API calls, monetize storage, kind of measure events and charge for that, and even outcomes as well. What's driving this interest, besides the fact that there are now a number of vendors that have come out and got, as Andrew mentioned, got a fair amount of funding to really roll out this product, this capability to broader masses. In part, it's the economy. When the economy is a bit uncertain, and it's uncertain a lot right now, companies begin to be very interested in this as an opportunity, because here's a pricing model where you can present something to a user that's aligned with their economic interest. If they use something, they get charged. If they don't get a bill or get a smaller bill. So it's really, from just an alignment standpoint, is something that's very interesting to both buyers and sellers. It tends to have less friction in terms of on-ramping the users and engaging with them, because they don't have to face a very large bill at the front of a relationship, but really can pay as they go, so to speak. And many companies are looking at this as an opportunity to capture value that may otherwise be lost. So for example, they may charge a software license, but there's also a storage fee that is perhaps included up to a certain amount. But if you have a user that really goes beyond that threshold of usage, then you can realize additional value from that. Another question we get a lot is, how big is usage billing? It's as big as a billing market. It's not a market by itself. It really is a feature of the existing agile billing marketplace. And that's important to remember as well. So what are the different flavors and capabilities within usage billing? Some basic concepts. So the very basic concept that somebody needs to understand about usage billing is it can be either postpaid or it can be prepaid. So in a postpaid relationship, customers start using a product. There's no advance payment. There may be some credit check, maybe to underwrite the risk involved with a client. But in most cases, it's just you start using, you provide a credit card as a deposit, so to speak, and charges are incurred and paid for at the end of a billing cycle. Very simple. And when in a prepaid relationship, it's like a prepaid calling card. Customers establish an account, there's a prepaid charge, and then the charges are incurred and deducted from a prepaid as relationship rolls forward. This can become fairly simple enough, you would say, but usage billing can become complex fairly quickly. Attached to these concepts of prepaid and postpaid, there's the concept of minimum spend. Oftentimes, companies will say we'll give you a certain unit pricing if you agree to spend a minimum amount every billing cycle. There's the concept of tiered pricing, meaning if you spend more the unit pricing may decline over time, which means you have to not only measure usage, but keep all of your usage records, because you may have to potentially, in some pricing models, you may have to reprice everything that happened prior to that point in the billing cycle. Whereas the concept of rating, where prices can vary based on who the customer is, where the customer is located in a particular point in time, what time of day it is, what's the weather outside. So there's different ways to kind of graduate the pricing and vary it based on a lot of external variables. Volume purchasing agreements. Even if you have a flat fee monthly subscription, if you want to do volume purchasing agreements, you effectively have to measure what is going on. And the concept of measuring actual usage, even if you don't use it for billing, is extremely important. And we talk about it in our research quite a bit. You need to see, if you want to have a successful subscription relationship, you need to measure engagement all the time. And engagement has to be measured by actual usage of a product as well. And then there are various combinations between usage and fixed recurring plans. We've seen a sort of dramatic expansion of interest in this area, and availability of more modern, kind of a lower footprint and lower cost tools in this area is in part now kind of stimulating some of the interest and some of the demand. So not all, this is a very important slide. So not all usage billing is the same. If you are in the process of thinking through a strategy and thinking, how can I apply it to my business? How can I create more engagement with my customers and give them an easier, more frictionless on-ramp into my product and acquire them as a customer? You need to have a tool or a tool set that really supports usage billing. But the question is, how much do you really need? Usage billing can vary widely in complexity. There's very, very basic use case where you take all your usage data for a billing cycle, create a batch file, load it up, and run it through your billing system. And most billing systems today can support this very basic use case. What happens if you get more complexity? Things can get much more sophisticated, fairly fast. We have multiple incompatible data sources. So you have one source that says, here is of actual usage of a product, and here is some other variable that affects the pricing and rating of that actual usage. Do you have to do the usage billing calculations in QuickTime or perhaps in real time? What if you have multiple real-time data sources that are also incompatible? What if you have to apply tiers to that model? And what if there are more complex combinations? So you can see the spectrum of complexity can be pretty wide here. So if you are picking a usage billing product, make sure that you understand what exactly do you need. Where are you in this spectrum of complexity? Even if you may be starting out with a basic usage billing case where you do a batch file at the end of the cycle, what happens 24, 36 months out? Do you need to have a tool that can support that? So it's an important consideration. So this brings us to an interesting concept and a product capability that's called mediation. And to anybody outside of world of enterprise software, and especially outside the world of billing and usage billing, mediation means a lot of different things. It almost sounds like a legal term, something that you agree to in case you have a dispute with another party. But mediation as a capability historically referred to ability to kind of take a variety of incompatible and incomplete and perhaps erroneous data sources in some cases and reconcile them, synchronize them, aggregate them, cleanse them, enrich them, and make sure that you have a clean data set, what's called the golden record, that really can support input into a billing system and enable sort of rapid monetization. If you are in the process of selecting of usage billing solution, if you're looking for a billing solution that supports usage, to be more precise, if you understand where you are in the spectrum, depending on where you are in that complexity spectrum, that may or not dictate the need for mediation capability. Simple thing to remember, if you have multiple incompatible data sources, if you have very custom deals with customers, if you have outcome-based pricing, or if you have volume purchasing agreements, you're going to require a product that can support some form of mediation. And that's a conversation that you need to have with your prospective suppliers. So in some ways, as I said, usage billing can be very simple, but at the same time, there is a lot of complexity here, and that can be a big challenge. A lot of times we hear from companies looking to implement consumption-based models, they kind of acutely feel that the complexity is so high that they don't really think that they can really implement this. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You have to be kind of cognizant and realistic about what your capabilities are and what the challenges at hand and what kind of tools you need to have. One of the business challenges we've seen with usage billing, both in terms of adopting it and as well as for vendors who provide the solutions, is this lack of predictability. With fixed payments, you know what you're going to get $9.95 per month from a certain customer. But with usage billing, it's much harder. And some companies are uncomfortable with that lack of certainty and lack of visibility into what the revenue might be. But yet at the same time, we've seen that companies that have adopted usage billing successfully, like there's one company we track in the event and ticketing space, their business is on fire and it's all usage based. It's all 100% usage based, and results are pretty tremendous. Data management can be very complex. That could be an obstacle and requires some investment in cleansing and really normalizing some of the data. Getting usage billing to work at scale and in less than geological time, an important consideration as well. And then there are often requirements to conduct audit and really make sure that in case there's any kind of a dispute with a client about a particular set of billing records, but you can go back and show them in clean text exactly what happened and why, what are the underlying components of a billing record and what happened and how much did you charge them and why, and compare that to the existing contract. There are many more complex issues. We are not going to have time to really go for every single one of them here. How do you sort of adapt usage billing or consumption-based pricing methods? What should be on your strategy roadmap? You need to have some basic understanding of what the capabilities, requirements, challenges are in this area. And I think that starts with basic education of your entire team. Make sure that everybody's on the same page and understands when certain things are required. Do you need to support volume purchasing agreements, or do you need to support tiered usage-based pricing? How much of an audit requirement do you have? How far back do you have to go back in any billing cycle or beyond? And just really get an understanding of where your business is going to be, not only now, but where your business and your competitive landscape are going to be 36 to 48 months out. I know it's oftentimes in this environment easier said than done, but that's what's really going to enable you to sort of not to have to recut your billing system every 24 months. You need to understand sort of your requirements for how much speed, how much scale you need. You're going to need to figure out storage. Storage, you could say, is cheap these days, but you may end up having a lot of data stored. Do you need to do real-time metering and rating? Do you need to sort of provide invoices and account records in real time? We deliberately didn't try to sort of put together a very detailed list, but just give you a flavor of some of the things you need to kind of think about. What's a plan? Kind of establish a plan looking forward and figure out what budget and what skill sets do you need for that. Do you have the skill sets in-house? Do you need to acquire that, bring somebody in from outside? And what's the backup plan? What if you run into an obstacle like you can't scale? You can't really achieve a performance that you need. And then I think once you get your package together, it's important to go on maneuvers, test it out. So run realistic tests for 3 to 6 months at least, I think, in almost every case. So where is usage billing today in terms of its adoption, so to speak? So we have been running an ongoing survey on billing and on usage billing specifically. And there's a couple of data points we extracted from that data set. And what we're finding is that 60% plus, pretty solid 60% plus of respondents are either using some form of usage billing today, or they plan to deploy it within the next 12 months. So that's pretty significant. And then if you look at organizations that view usage billing as critical, we picked out 3 different attributes of what they see as being important. So of those that think usage billing is critical to their business, 70% think that they need real-time billing. They see it as critically important. Nobody is exclusively usage billing. That's also a very, very important observation. And we mentioned this earlier, but usage is not the opposite of subscriptions. Typically, companies don't want to buy just a usage billing tool. They want to buy a robust billing platform, billing solution that can really help them monetize their opportunities and be able to deploy whatever pricing method is required. So almost no one of the people that are serious about usage, we're also using lots and lots of different other pricing models. And what we find also is interesting, that majority of those who are viewing usage billing as critical, they are growing at a pretty healthy clip at above 20%. And yet we see a lot of friction, continue to see a lot of friction, which kind of reflects the relative lack of maturity when it comes to usage billing for companies that are outside the traditional set of utilities and telecom companies or large hyperscalers in tech. Okay, with that kind of contains most of our kind of prepared remarks. I wanted to point out a few relevant pieces of research, and if you're watching the screen, you can scan the link to some of the items we have, especially the Margin, which is our regular biweekly newsletter, which you can subscribe to freely. We've published recently a lot of material on billing, or agile billing as we call it. We produced this guide called Agile Billing Top 50, which contains ratings and opinions on upwards to 50 of the leading billing companies in the world. We've published a number of what we call market lenses, which really compare and contrast capabilities and positioning of those different suppliers. And separately from the sort of very tight focus on billing, we published a forecast on professional services automation software, where billing actually is a big problem, continues to be a big issue, challenge in terms of billing for both services, time, as well as expenses as well. And so we kind of, there's a lot of different research. Come to our website, take a look, look at the newsletter, subscribe, and we invite you to participate back in our webinars that are now back on a monthly schedule. So speaking of that, our next webinar is on September 19th, where we will get into some of the economics preview for the next year and look at some of the budget planning issues that some of the companies are facing. And then in October, at the end of October, we are planning to have a interesting kind of unscripted, unvarnished live debate amongst some CEOs of contract lifecycle management companies. So we hope that you can join us for that as well. And with that, I think, Andrew, we have time for a few questions.
We've got 5 minutes here. A couple things that came in as people registered for the event. First, one thing you didn't touch on is there's a number of companies, roughly a baker's dozen, that have come out in the last 2 to 3 years as purported usage billing companies. In the most recent ratings, only one of those companies, Monetize, 360 actually got a full rating. Everybody else was an honorable mention. The question that came in is pertains to that, which is why was there only one that got a full rating, and any other remarks on the other suppliers that you want to share?
Yeah, good question. Well, we generally would rate somebody if we can get qualified references, if we can really go in and do our field work and validate a lot of with, promises and claims made by vendors. In some cases, some of his companies are relatively new. We do have customers, but we need to have somebody go on record, so to speak, and confirm some of the capabilities that are claimed by suppliers. In general, we think that this group of new vendors will bring something fairly important to the space. I think it's really ability to bring this capability down to many startups and Series A, Series B companies that never would have thought about doing usage billing, but now we can. So that's an important sort of broadening of the aperture of this market, and really expanding the billing market overall. So that's kind of the genesis of why we did not rate most of the current sort of newly funded companies in the usage billing space.
Another question that came in, kind of two parts. The first is, what advice would you give to an organization that's looking at adding a usage or consumption type model? How do you do financial planning and forecasting when it's uncertain or unknown what the adoption or consumption rate, consumption take up is going to be?
Yeah, a good question as well. The uncertainty of where things are going to be with usage billing is one of the major strikes against it, not just from a technical standpoint, but more so from a business and forecasting standpoint. Companies ultimately want predictability, both buyers and sellers,
And investors.
and investors as well, obviously, right?
Yeah.
That's a kind of a different kind of golden record, so to speak. You need to build scenarios and really assume kind of probabilities to some extent what's going to happen. So you build your mainstream scenario, you build a very conservative point of view, and you build a very optimistic point of view, and try to understand all three and try to be ready for all three. So if the mainstream scenario happens, what next? If a conservative scenario happens, how do you go around it? What are the steps? What's the choreography to support that? And if you have wild success, what do you do with that? Are you prepared to consume that? So I think that's really what's required to do that. Also, a lot of companies, a lot of clients will tell you, we can start with usage billing, and if it works, we'll convert to something that's more predictable. The typical steps are companies, want to say, okay, I want to start with a postpaid plan, no commitment. I know you're going to charge me a high unit price, but I don't want to commit. I don't want to sign any kind of a long-term contract. I just want to try out the product and see how it goes, and that's fine. And then the next step after that is let's do a prepaid, and maybe prepaid with some caps. And next step after that would be, well, let's see if we can convert that to a fixed charge, annual charge, and negotiate how it's paid, whether it's paid, monthly, quarterly, or annually, or maybe one big fee up front. So there's different ways. I mean, in a way, consumption-based pricing models give both the suppliers and the consumers a lot of flexibility, a lot of sort of leeway in terms of how to negotiate deals and be successful on both ends of it.
Okay, another question related to that organization looking at adopting this. Everyone now in the billing space, it seems, says that they can do usage billing. What would be your litmus test? What would be some of the questions you would ask to try to ferret out how much and how well they can really do it?
Yeah. I think I would want to map the potential suppliers against that complexity spectrum chart that we have to see what use cases can they support. I would say, not show me the money, but show me the references. I want to talk to them and really understand what exactly have you guys done in each use case. I would want to understand what the product is not good at. Not only what is it good at, but what's the opposite of that? Where is it not a fit? Um, I would want to ask them about things like dynamic pricing. If I wanted dynamic pricing, how would I do it? If I have 2, 3 different incompatible input data sets and they need to be normalized because they come from different time zones, they need to be enriched. There are differences with both syntactic and semantic between the data sets. How would you handle that? So I would really want to understand that part of it.
We're at the
Feel free to
bottom of
add.
the hour here. Yeah, there's one more question here that I think we can squeeze in, which is if you have a comprehensive platform with a lot of features, how do you hone in or zero in on the right volume metric to tie your model to?
Boy, that's kind of very specific. The you have to kind of figure out how much volume you're going to do on a daily basis. It depends on whether you're doing things in batch, QuickTime, or real time. So you should really look at this through 3 separate lenses. If you're doing batch, you can do a lot more volume and your processing window may be more tolerant. If you're doing even QuickTime or real time, you need to test it in a different context and basically make sure that you can process a certain amount of volume. You may be intaking a lot of what's called, it used to be called cold data records, CDRs, or event records in case, let's say, of any kind of a data-related business like cloud hosting. How many are you going to be processing? So the benchmarks are companies that have tens of thousands of records per day or even hundreds of thousands of records per day. That's actually low volume for something like robust usage billing. You get into millions pretty quickly. You get into 10, 15 million records per day. See if a solution that you pick really can support that. And the top of the line, companies that do 5G, some of the processing as they do 5G, they're processing billions and billions of records every day.
Carl Sagan, billions.
Exactly.
It also, I think, gets back to what you touched on earlier in the presentation, which is you really want to be able to track usage and consumption of a product independent of your pricing models and your business model to understand how are people actually consuming your product and where are they getting value, or at least where are they getting the most usage out of it. And just being able to do that and inputting that into your pricing strategy and offers, I think, has a lot of value beyond just offering it up right away. So getting that input first and tracking that over time, 1, 2, 3 quarters, to see what the trends are like and where people are really using the product makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's absolutely key. Even if you just do a fixed monthly subscription, if your customers are not using your product, not consuming it, you're probably not going to have good renewal anyway.
That's right. So with that, Igor, do you have any closing remarks? Otherwise, we can wrap this up.
If any of you are looking to evaluate solutions in this area or need a kind of want to do a sounding board conversation about what your strategy is, feel free to reach out. We have a lot more research coming out in this area. We're going to be kind of intensifying coverage and look forward to your feedback and questions.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. We appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you on the next session with MGI Research.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.